Jobs empower individuals, reduce poverty, enhance well-being, and drive social stability and economic growth. Africa's largest and growing age group, its youth population, is also its least gainfully employed. Of Africa's over 400 million youth aged between 15 and 35, an estimated 2/3 are either unemployed or vulnerably employed. By 2050, Africa is expected to account for 1/4 of the world's working age population, making youth employment a critical issue not just for Africa, but for the rest of the world. As part of the Oxford Martin School's Future of Development program, this podcast series, Africa Which Way Employment, delves into strategies for creating decent jobs that elevate incomes and ensure economic progress across the continent. Hello and welcome to Africa Which Way Employment, a series dedicated to unpacking the multifaceted layers of employment on the continent, showcasing individuals and initiatives that are driving positive socioeconomic outcomes and inspiring actionable solutions to job creation and economic equity. My name is Oluwatamilore Oni, and I'm in Oxford today, and I'm joined by Ms. Arunma Oteh. She is a global leader recognized for her contributions to financial markets and economic development. She's currently an academic here at the University of Oxford, sits on numerous boards, including the over a century-old Royal Africa Society, where she is the chair, and also King's Trust International. Notably, Ms. Oteh has served as the Vice President and Treasurer of the World Bank, Director General of Nigeria's Securities and Exchange Commission, and Group Treasurer at the Africa Development Bank. And in recognition of her leadership and contributions to development, she was awarded the Officer of the Order of the Niger, one of Nigeria's highest national honors. She was named the Forbes Africa Female Changemaker of the Decade this year, and recently released a bestseller, All Hands on Deck, which is a call to action for everyone to do their part in building a prosperous society for all. Thank you so much, Ms. Oteh, for joining this podcast and making time to have this conversation with me.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm absolutely honored to be one of your guests.
I think the honor is mine, but we can argue and debate about that some other time. In this episode, we'll be discussing the intersections between policymaking, macroeconomics, and job creation. What questions policymakers need to be thinking about as we traverse the path to prosperity, and what are the key levers to successfully translate ambitious policy objectives into progress. So I think I've been doing this with the guests on the podcast to start off with an interesting job story from their history or past. Is there anything that you'd be happy to share with me and our listeners today?
So my mother, being a nurse, wanted me to be a medical doctor. My father wanted me to be an engineer. But from when I was 8 years old, my parents were investing in the Nigerian stock market. And after dinner, my father would make me read bulky annual reports of the companies that they'd invested in. Of course, they were poor civil servants, didn't earn very much money, but they complemented their income through investing in the Nigerian stock markets. But when it came time for me to choose a career, I chose finance, and I've spent my entire 40 years career in finance. And my father, my late father, when he was alive, was like, "Oh, but I thought you'd be an engineer." I said, "But I thought you started me with my first job, which is to read unpaid the annual reports of companies that you'd invested in."
Maybe also to set the scene a little bit, because one of the questions that I've been pursuing in this, digging deeper into unemployment, solutions to unemployment, is realizing that there's a much bigger picture to these issues. It's beyond just the supply and demand in terms of the relationship between an employer and the employee. There's so many other factors that go into what happens from skilling to getting to a job, and all the different connection points about like enabling environment for businesses and so on and so forth. But your perspective, you've had over, you mentioned 40 decades in the financial system, also, or financial industry, and then also working with multilaterals, the World Bank, AFDB, Africa Development Bank, and working with regulators, with policymakers. You're also working with, businesses themselves and job seekers in different capacities. From your perspective, what would you say, why is unemployment or why is employment important in terms of the grand scheme of things? And what would you say your own journey, your personal journey has informed you about this particular issue and how to address it?
That's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah.
So I'll start with, first of all, just acknowledging you for this series. I actually do think that the unemployment challenge, particularly in Africa, is one of the most difficult challenges. The IMF estimates that there are 15 million Africans every year that are ready for the job market. So you have to find 15 million jobs. And in my view, it's either a dividend or a ticking time bomb. With some of the challenges we have in society, what you don't want is that terrorists are able to recruit young people much quicker than businesses should be able to recruit more people. If you look at some of the data, in 5 years' time, 50% of the new entrants will come from Africa. In 25 years' time, Africans will make up 25% of the global workforce. So it's not just an important issue for Africa, it's an important issue for society. So for me, that's first important. The second is that you then have to tackle it from a holistic point of view. You have to have an ecosystem approach to it. As somebody who's spent time as a policymaker, spends time with a lot of policymakers, I think focusing on the macroeconomic environment is probably one way forward, because that way you can look at issues of employment holistically. Because unemployment is a macroeconomic issue, just as much as the performance of an economy, which is really what macroeconomics is, versus what microeconomics is, which is the performance at the firm level as an individual. But if you're looking at the performance of a nation, the performance of a region, the performance of society as a whole, then you're focused on macroeconomics. You're focused on unemployment. You're focused on economic growth, which is important if you do want, to tackle the unemployment issues. You're focused on issues around prices in one country versus another, which is what exchange rates are. You're focused on the cost of financing. So, the central bank setting interest rates in a particular country versus the interest rates in another country. You're focused on issues about productivity. How efficient is a workforce, or what is the impact of technology on issues around an economy. You're focused on the impact of education, the impact of other social sectors. So I really do think that if anybody needs to be serious, and if Africa needs to be serious about tackling unemployment, it needs to focus on the broad agenda. Your trade policies are extremely important. On the other hand, when you think about the progress that Africa has made with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which hopefully will address some of the intra-trade issues for the continent. And I don't know if you're probably aware of this, but the intra-African trade is about 15%, while trade within Asia is about 59%, and trade within the EU is about 69%. So if we think about what it would take to improve intra-African trade, we're also thinking about opportunities to create jobs. Another example is, the fact that everyone continues to say that there's not as much focus on adding value to Africa's wealth. So I say this as often as I can say it, that Africa has enormous wealth in its people, but also in its natural resources. So 90% of platinum reserves and platinum is in Africa. 80% of coltan, which is used to make cell phones, to make precision instruments that go into airplanes, comes from the continent of Africa. 70% by value of diamonds, is in Africa. And I can go on and on, bauxite, lead, just name whatever important mineral, not just for today, but even for a carbon-free world. And so the question is, if someone's thinking holistically about unemployment, then you're saying maybe we need to seek how we can add more value within the continent rather than export commodities. I'm just thinking to myself the other day, I was like, what about chocolate, which is a basic one. So Ivory Coast is the world's largest producer of cocoa, and they earn less than $4 billion per year. Guess what that market is globally of chocolate? It's at least $120 billion. So both Ivory Coast and Ghana, who are top producers, are thinking about how do we add more value so we can earn some of the benefits of cocoa that is grown in our nation. And you can say the same thing for so many other areas. But the point that I'm making is that if you think about unemployment from a holistic point of view, if you think about how do you tackle it as a nation from a macroeconomic point of view, the lens that you have has breadth and allows you to start to peel off the 15 million people who are coming out every year waiting for a job.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think in terms of setting the scene, you've talked about like the larger like social stability, engaging our growing population, the complexities of trade and building wealth. And I think it then comes down to this question of, what is prosperity and what is progress, especially for Africa as a continent, and how do we think about ways to get to the ideal prosperous Africa that is, everyone is economically included, and everyone kind of feels like they have the opportunities to advance and grow and progress in life, them and their children and, families and communities. And it's very clear, at least to me now, over the last few weeks, that we can't just be thinking about issues in silos. We need to be thinking about things in a multilateral way. And this was something I actually noticed in your book where you define multilateralism. Maybe then pivots into the focus on finance and how that can help to unlock that development question when it comes to unemployment. And I also touched on some of the points in your book as well. Just a random note of the book. I've read a few parts of it, not the entire thing cover to cover, and it's very interesting. There's some nuggets about you potentially coming up for a ministerial nomination in 2007 and how you eventually ended up as DG of the SEC. And anyway, but I felt this was very interesting in terms of just the way it's written and the way that you've laid it out. But one of the things that you point to or you mention is that you feel like there are two. Actually, let me just quote it verbatim. I have it here. You mentioned that Africa's transformation from a continent struggling with poverty and inadequate infrastructure to a thriving, prosperous society hinges on two critical factors: visionary leadership and the development of world-class capital markets. We'll come back to the visionary leadership piece, but on this point about development of world-class capital markets, I guess there's an idealist in me that thinks that there's a one thing that you need to do that would then unlock. So once you figure out this one thing, everything else kind of will fall into place when it comes to like development. And you propose that, world-class capital markets are a starting point, a good, efficient, and feasible starting point to unlock this. Can you speak more about that and why, I guess from your experience, why this is the one thing that you've come on as the thing?
So first of all, I'm really just in awe of you that you've had taken time to read my book, All Hands on Deck. As you said at the beginning, it's a call to action. And the title, All Hands on Deck, is intentional. It's intentional because, a friend of mine says, of course, when she saw it, she's like, okay, she will talk about the capital markets because she talks about capital markets all the time. And maybe that's true. But what is also true is that capital markets are important, but they're also something that every individual can connect with. And the question I ask you, do you have money? Every human being, in my view, deals with their finances, whether you have $1, a naira, or you have $1 billion naira or $1 billion. So my view is that finance is life. In fact, that managing money is managing your life. So as an individual, you participate in society and you express yourself in society through how you manage money or how money is managed on your behalf. So the individual is, in my view, at the center of society, and finance through the individual is at the center of society. Similarly, if you're a new business, if you're a business that needs to expand, you need to raise money to expand your business or to start a new business. If you have extra money, you can put it in, invest it you can invest it in another business, you can invest in the stock market, you can buy bonds, you can do a lot of things in it. You can even invest in a friend's business, for example. And if you're a government, you need lots of money. In fact, one of the challenges, one of the reasons we have the level of unemployment we have in Africa is the size of the needs of Africa in terms of finances. So you've got, I think the African Development Bank says between $130 to $170 billion a year is what you need in infrastructure to address Africa's infrastructure problem. So the capital market is that market that brings together those who have money, excess money that they would want to deploy and make money on, so that others who don't have money can benefit from it. So one piece of it is just the point that everybody participates in issues related to finance. One of the specific challenges for Africa is that most of our markets have been focused on the banking sector, while capital markets allow you to borrow longer term. And part of what long-term money does is gives you, it's patient capital, so allows you a breathing space so that you can do more with it. But beyond money, capital markets do a lot of things. One of the challenges that Africa's unemployment has is that there's a lot of participation in the informal sector. And what capital markets does is bring more formality, which means that the jobs are higher quality, that people are paid correctly. Governance issues are handled in a way that is best practice. There's also the issue of scale. A lot of, I always say that, if Mark Zuckerberg or, who founded Facebook, or Bill Gates who founded Microsoft, never had the acceleration that they had, that you could still call them small and medium scale enterprises. When they started in their dorm rooms, they were small and medium scale enterprises. So part of what helps accelerate and build big institutions is actually capital, and it's the governance that comes from capital markets, is the participation of other people in an idea that is birth. So that's, but as I said, my friend thinks it's because I spent my career in capital markets. That's why I think capital markets is the solution. But it's just because it's money, but it's beyond finance. It's about governance. It's about formalization. It's about skill. It's about replication. It's about bringing people together. So some of what needs to happen in Africa is to have markets that are integrated so that the smaller markets can participate and benefit in the way that large markets benefit from. So that's my solution. But I also believe that a stable macroeconomic environment and financing and investing is one input to a stable macroeconomic environment is also critical for critical. But yeah, capital markets is the answer, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I would also say interesting when you mentioned or you describe like all hands on deck as a call to action. That's also kind of how I describe this podcast series. So the title is Which Way Employment, right? Which is based off of the song. Yes, the song Which Way Nigeria. And I felt like Which Way Nigeria is a call to action in a sense, like sort of saying, okay, how can we get all hands on deck to like make this work, to make this happen? And you've mentioned, like, from your perspective and your experience, you've said this is why you think, capital markets is the key, because it's what enables that transition from informality to formal jobs and more formal, I guess, employment ecosystem where you have high quality jobs, you're able to create wealth for individuals and families and communities, and also revenue generation for governments, right? But then I guess, what are the key ingredients to unlocking that capital markets ecosystem in Africa or in African countries? Also very aware that every African country is different, has different contexts, cultural backgrounds. So it's not like a generalization thing, but we have so much to learn from each other. What are the sort of key things that you feel like need to be put in place to accelerate the capital markets in the way that you envision it for Africa, to get to the gains that a capital market can provide for the countries on the continent?
It's a very important question that you've asked, and there's a very simple answer, which is that you have to build a world-class capital market. And what do I define as a world-class capital market? It's one where investors feel that their monies are safe. And being a world-class capital market means that people then can borrow at reasonable levels. And what drives that? It's that if people do wrong, that they'll get punished very quickly. And so the cost of doing wrong is higher than the benefits of the wrongdoing. And so trust is a big issue in building a world-class capital market. Products that meet the needs of the individual investor, products that meet the needs of big business, that meet the needs of government.
When you say products, what do you mean?
So, for example, if you want to invest in the stock of a blue chip company like Unilever, it's nice that you can invest in the stock. But it may be that because if you're not as familiar with the stock market, maybe providing you a mutual fund that allows you not just to invest in Unilever, but to invest in a basket of stocks as one. One where you can enter and come out as easily is also very important. Other aspects of the market are, the non-public markets. So, as happens today, a lot of what has supported the development of some of the developed economies has been the private equity markets. Do you have a market where you can provide funding but also provide knowledge to support a business to grow?
But I guess, and again, this is now kind of outside of my own academic wheelhouse in terms of some of the terminology they're using. I'm not as familiar with.
So one of the things that I hope that I'm doing is using more standard terminology to describe things. It's a work in progress for me.
No, it is. So it's I guess it's interesting and compelling for me also just to understand more clearly what exactly needs to happen. I think is also where my own mind is going. So you described what a world, I mean, the kind of traits or characteristics of the ideal capital market that and allows for this innovation and allows for job creation. So you've spoken about like trust, having relevant or a basket or a variety of products, having liquid markets. You mentioned sophistication, and also just there's one more thing which my handwriting I can't read now. But yeah, but I
But
guess
you've mentioned the important ones.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
but would the idea here be that these things are missing in African capital markets as they exist now? And if these elements are missing, what needs to be done to get to this point where we have these things that say tick, 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 check box, if you're thinking about it that way, so that that foundation can be laid for businesses to grow, and then create job opportunities. What are the gaps that we need to essentially address?
Oh, absolutely. I think the level of sophistication, liquidity, the variety of products, in some markets, issues around investors being confident that their money will not be stolen from them. That if they lost their money, it's because of because of the investment decision, not because somebody tried to scam them of their money. And by the way, one thing that is particular that I should have mentioned is that a number of the markets are very small. So just as we're seeking through trade to bring African markets together, seeking ways in which these markets can come together is extremely important. And there are already initiatives from the regulators, from the stock exchanges to come together. In East Africa, you can basically trade in any of the countries. The Association of Stock Exchanges, Association of African Stock Exchanges, is also working on an initiative that I think the African Development Bank is helping them, is part sponsoring, to make sure that the same thing can happen around the continent. So integration is extremely important. The education, I didn't mention one that's particularly important. So just people understanding the value of capital markets and how they operate. I was fortunate, that I grew up in a household where my parents, even though not finance people, learned about investing and taught me at a young age to start thinking about investing. We should have the same happen in Africa for young people. It should be in the curricula. And one of the things that a number of the regulators in Africa do is that they provide, because the mandate for a number of the African capital market regulators is both developing the markets and also regulating the markets. And a number of them provide support, particularly the Nigerian SEC, at different levels to improve financial literacy. They provide support to primary schools, to secondary schools, to universities. They have programs for judges, they have programs for journalists, as a way to continue to improve the understanding of financial markets. Because the initial reaction of people who are not familiar with financial markets that, this is something that mathematicians should be familiar with, yet it's an everyday thing. And yet there are ways in which people can invest in the market. So those are the two that I would add: integration of the markets in Africa, financial literacy across board, so that more people will be familiar with the markets. It's huge. But your approach of framing it as something that you look at from a holistic point of view helps for me. I think that's how policymakers should look at it. It's not just one issue. It's how do we tackle the issue of bringing greater prosperity? And particularly for Africa, where there's wealth, it's just that the wealth is not organized such that the people, the average person, is able to take care of themselves. I mean, I think 27 of the 30 poorest countries in the world are in Africa. It should not be for such a wealthy continent.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing these. And I'm conscious of the time, and there's so many other questions that are now popping up in my head. But I guess also just to kind of focus a little on innovation within, or innovative approaches to this issue, and building out a trusted financial foundation for any sort of economic progress and growth. You mean always referencing the decades of experience you have working in financial markets, and then also you're on the board of the King's Trust International, which one of their focuses is supporting skills and youth and employment in Africa. Also several years with the Africa Development Bank. supporting vaccine plants establishments across the Nigeria as well. I think you worked Western North Africa. I read something. Let me even
That
say
must
it.
have been very early in my career. Yeah, I covered Western North African countries as a loan officer. Oh my
Agricultural
God,
development.
you've done quite some research on my background.
No, it's necessary to have the most effective conversation. But what would you say are some of the innovative approaches that you have either been a part of or you're keeping an eye on, that you see that is really helping to improve the job creation environment or helping to solve for that? Are there any sort of thing that you can pinpoint or highlight?
Actually, there's a point that you made, which I should have made at the beginning, that the unemployment challenge is even a bigger challenge because of the population growth in Africa. And I think 60% of Africans are below the age of 20 or 25. And so the focus on youth and employment or youth well-being is particularly significant. And so I can talk about lots of innovation, but since you mentioned the King's Trust International, maybe I'll start with that and then say a few things about the African Development Bank as well. So the King Charles, almost 50 years ago, decided that there was a youth employment crisis in the UK, and he had gotten gratuity. So this is 1976, so it'll be 50 years next year, from being in the Navy, and decided to use that gratuity to set up what was then Prince's Trust UK. And the idea was really to focus on how do you make young people, how do you educate them in ways that support their learning? How do you make them more employable? And how do you help them build skills and entrepreneurship? And 10 years ago, so the King's Trust International, which I'm on the board of, was founded to do the same thing globally. So the mission is, how do you help young people learn, earn, and thrive? And some of the programs are done in modern ways. So there's a program called the Achieve program, which basically the learner is the one that's in the driver's seat, is the way that I describe it. So you have groups of 10 people, they have a facilitator, and they focus on learning the things that they feel are important, but helping them build confidence, helping them with behavioral skills, helping them with communication skills, helping them learn in an informal environment. And they do this, for a period of 2 years. They meet once or twice a week. And what has been found in the research is that they've all, gotten better, they've gotten employed, and all of that. The other is, another example I can cite is the Enterprise Challenge program, which is basically a gamification of how you set up an enterprise, partnered with mentors. And the mentors, help guide young people as to how they can set up an enterprise. And they focus on a social enterprise idea. So when the King visited Kenya in November of 2023, I was honored to have seen some of the work that the very young people were doing on issues of environment, on areas that allow them to also focus on the community, on what they can, what difference they can make, tree planting, recycling type examples. So it's really saying, how do you use non-traditional alternative learning methods to support young people? The other aspect of it is the value of digitalization, and something that I haven't mentioned in this conversation is the value of technology. And if Africa wants to sort out its unemployment challenge, it needs to be intentional about issues around technology. So one big area for the King's Trust International is also a focus on leveraging digital tools to pass on knowledge. So they have learning programs in Nigeria that the King's Trust International supports using WhatsApp. and it's been absolutely amazing in terms of how valuable it's been for the young people to learn and be supported through WhatsApp. The African Development Bank, under the current leadership, the president, Dr. Adeshina, started this initiative of youth entrepreneurship banks. And basically what they decided was that the traditional banks will not normally lend to a young person because, to get a loan, you need to maybe show 5 years financial statements of your business. You need to have collateral. And of course, young people don't have that starting out. So what they're doing is setting up youth entrepreneurship banks to target young people and to support them. There are other things, providing. So it's providing business support services, it's providing mentorship, it's providing understanding that they may not have collaterals. In my view, really having interventions that focuses specifically on young people would be some of the innovative approaches that come to mind in terms of supporting young people.
I think it's also interesting that perspective of like on this youth entrepreneurship bank. I guess youth also having the agency to also be a part of the solution that has not like this sort of removed group of people or exactly interventions for them or done at them essentially, but thinking about how are they also involved in like shaping the narrative one, and then also shaping the solutions and shaping the interventions that they are supposed to be recipients of. Maybe then going back to one of the initial questions about from a policymaker perspective, and if you were to advise an African head of states on a single high impact intervention for job creation, what that would be, or if that's not the question, or
no, that's fine.
Is that a question? Okay.
I've offered to answer that question in a different setting. I've offered people that I think that if you do want to prepare young people to enjoy the benefits of life, that they need to just have finance and digital skills. So for me, investing intentionally in education is what I would pay attention to. Because in many countries today in Africa, people, come out with PhDs, but they can't actually do anything with their PhDs. So having, being intentional in the quality and the type of education that's being provided to young people is one area. And I would certainly make sure that people are digitally savvy and people, are financially literate if I had to make a choice.
It's interesting. I think on your point, you mentioned the value of technology, and you've also mentioned digital skills here. So my own background has also, like, last few years worked in technology-focused philanthropy and digital skills intervention. And then it's sort of their position in equipping young people for the future of work and the trajectory of growth. And we've seen, like, I think I've had a lot of conversations about, AI. It's difficult to not have a conversation that kind of touches on AI and technology at some point, because that is where the world is, and that's where the future is as well.
I have a friend who says, "You AI or die." Those are the two options. And I like his mantra, AI or die. What I would love to see is policymakers in Africa leapfrog. In the same way, in my view, that Africa leapfrogged on mobile telephony. The kinds of I remember 30 years ago, in Nigeria, there were 500,000 people who had telephone connections. And today, it's not a luxury. There's probably about 100 million handsets in Nigeria. And, there's mobile banking. People are using the mobile telephony for a lot of things. I'd like to see the same kind of thing happen with artificial intelligence. I actually worry that the threats of artificial intelligence are very high for those who are not paying attention. But I also see the opportunity for African countries to leapfrog.
I think that's a very compelling perspective as well in terms of we've leapfrogged before in one particular area, and then we can potentially also leapfrog when it comes to this issue, and as well as all the connecting issues. So job creation, creation of markets, comparative advantage, trade, wealth creation, entrepreneurship, and all the entire sort of package or bouquet of economic development.
Which is a holistic macroeconomic approach. Yes.
Thank you for sharing. I think I can end on one note. There's one quote from All Hands on Deck where it says, in prosperous nations, daily life often revolves around opportunities for personal and professional growth, which I feel sort of sums up your last few points about education, foundational issues that need to be solved in terms of like the skills and the knowledge that we have on the continent to then unlock a lot of these aspirational development goals. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
I could have been interviewing you. I've absolutely enjoyed this as well, and I've learned quite a bit.
I appreciate your time. Well. Thank you so much. And to everyone who listened and watched, thank you, and see you on the next episode.